Are you ready for the word? Turn to Exodus chapter 12. Oh, pardon me. Exodus chapter 12, verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. I told you last week that this morning we'd look at passages where the word Kodesh was translated as new moon. And we're going to do that. We're going to look at as many of them as we can. Not all 20, but as many as we can. But first, before we do that, I need to reiterate Exodus 12, and I need to share with you a passage of concern that was brought up to me at the end of last Sabbath. So let's begin by looking at Exodus chapter 12. This is where you have to start in any study of the new moon. If you start anywhere else studying the new moon, you're going to have difficulty arriving at a right and correct doctrine. You cannot start in 1 Samuel 20. You can't start in 2 Kings 4. You can't start in Ezekiel 46. You can't start in Isaiah 66. To understand new moon, you have to start here in Exodus chapter 12. The reason is because this is the first place we find the use of the phrase, the beginning of months. I think I've got that highlight. Yeah, beginning of months. Those who teach that we're to celebrate the new moon hijack this phrase. When it's used in Numbers chapter 10, when it's used in Numbers chapter 28, they hijack it and say that that refers to the new moon or the first day of the month. But we cannot, and we should not, assign a meaning to this phrase that violates the definition of the phrase that's given to us in this very clear passage. We cannot get to Numbers 10 and ignore what Exodus 12:2 said. We can't get to Numbers 28 and ignore what Exodus 12:2 says. If Torah defines the phrase, and it does, then wherever that phrase is used, we have to abide by the definition of it that's given to us in this passage. So again, look at the text. It says, this month shall be unto you the beginning of months. The phrase beginning of months comes from what two Hebrew words? That's the reason we're rehearsing. Rosh Hodesh. Very good. So it comes from the Hebrew words Rosh Hodesh. And Rosh means head, chief, or top. It's translated hundreds of times in our scriptures, or it's used hundreds of times in our scriptures, and the majority of the time it's one of those three words, the head, the chief, or the top. And then Hodesh, you look it up, that word means month, all right? The clear meaning of Rosh Hodesh is the head month, the chief month, the top month. And there is no confusion concerning which month it is. Torah is clear. This month. Which month? Exodus 12 is talking about what month? The month of Abib. This month shall be the head month. This month shall be the chief month. This month shall be the top month. Not the beginning of every month. Not the fourth month, not the seventh month, but this month, Abib, shall be the head month. And we know that the month Yahweh was talking about was the month that comes around the spring equinox when the barley was in the Abib stage, just by reading the passages before Exodus chapter 12. So mark that. Yahweh said plainly, Abib shall be the head month of the year to you. And to make sure he was crystal clear, to make sure we didn't confused about what he meant, he added this, it shall be, that head month shall be the first month of the year to you. It shall be, Abib shall be the first month of the year to you. This phrase cannot and does not have to have a reference to any other month in the year. Rosh Hodesh is a reference to one month and one month only, and it is to the month of Abib. And it's not only the head month, but we're told here it's the first month. Rosh means head, top, chief, but Rishon means first. So Rosh Hodesh, Abib, shall be Rishon Hodesh, the first month. Rishon Hodesh means the first month of the year to you. So in Exodus 12, Yahweh used two terms to describe the month of Abib. He said it is Rosh Hodesh and it is Rishon Hodesh, meaning head month and meaning first month. If we start there, anytime we're going to study the new moon, if we start right there and embrace that truth, if we're unwilling to ignore what's plainly written there in Exodus 12:2, if we're unwilling to reject the truth found there, the clear instruction of that will guide us through every interpretation of every other scripture. Exodus 12, I said it this way. Well, I didn't put it up there. Yep, there it is. Exodus 12 must be our guide and our instructor as we study every other scripture related to the phrase, the beginning of months. It has to be our guide and our instructor. With that foundation, I want to show you the passage that was brought up to me as we finished our new moon study last Sabbath. I was approached and asked about this verse in Numbers chapter 28. It says, and their drink offering shall be half a hin of wine unto a bullock, and the third part of a hin unto a ram, and a fourth part of a hin unto a lamb. This is the burnt offering of every month throughout the months of the year. This is the burnt offering of every month throughout the months of the year. Now, none of us have any right to say we study the Bible if we're unwilling to look at and examine tough passages like that. You can't just pretend it's not there. It definitely appears to suggest some kind of offering for every month. Now notice though, it doesn't say every new moon. It says every Hodesh, every month throughout the months of the year. And those who say it is a new moon offering being spoken of here, go back to verse 11 and use the phrase beginning of months as their justification for saying that this is talking about the new moon of every month. But let's go back and look at verse 11. And in the beginning of your months, you shall offer a burnt offering unto Yahweh, 2 young bullocks and 1 ram, 7 lambs of the first year without spot. So the way new moon observers interpret beginning of your months is by the phrase new moon. They say it's talking about the new moon, which begins every month. So the argument is every new moon calls for a special observance and special offerings. And that seems to be strongly confirmed when we get down to verse 14, where it says there are burnt offerings of every month throughout the months of the year. Let me show you, if I may, and I don't mean my way is the only way, but let me show you how I have learned to study and examine the scripture. I think it'll help. I hope it'll help. Let me show you verse 14 with the Strong's numbers, because when this was shown to me, the first thing I did standing right here, the first thing I did is opened up my eSword on my phone and I looked up the words. And here's what I found out. I'm not going to read all of that, but I want you to notice down at the bottom where it says, this is the burnt offering of every month throughout the months of the year. Notice the Hebrew word H2320, which is Hodesh. You see that? It used Hodesh 3 times. It literally says the burnt offering of Hodesh, Hodesh, Hodesh of the year. It's the burnt offering of the Hodesh of the Hodeshes of the year. Now that's an alert to me, because they had to decide how they were going to translate this Hebrewism where there's 3 Hodeshes in a row. When I encounter a verse that looks, let's call it interesting. When I encounter a verse that looks interesting and it requires me to make a judgment of what it means, here's what I do. I always go back to the beginning. And so the first thing I did here is I backed up to, there I showed you, Hodesh of the year. But I go back to verse 11. I just backed up a few verses, right? I find the phrase Rosh Hodesh there in verse 11. And in the beginning of your months, or in Rosh Hodesh, you shall offer an offering unto YAHWEH. And I know that Rosh Hodesh means head month, chief month, or top month. Now, all I have to do when I read that is figure out what's meant by head month. And note, there is a big difference between head of the months and head month, right? So I go in search of the definition of this phrase, Rosh Hodesh. And it always takes me back to Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. Where Exodus 12 said, it shall be Rosh Hodesh, the head of the month, and it shall be the first month of the year to you. So it always takes me back there. So with that definition, I come back to the text, and I know that beginning of verse 11, that in Numbers 28, I know that passage is talking about Rosh Hodesh. It didn't change the subject between verse 11 and verse 14. It's talking about Rosh Hodesh. And I know from Exodus 12 that Numbers 28 has to be talking about the month of Abib. Has to be. Because it's the only one called Rosh Hodesh. There's no justification and no support for Rosh Hodesh to be talking about anything else. It has to be talking about Abib. Now, I come back and I look at verse 14 with clear understanding that Numbers chapter 28 is talking about Abib and Abib only, and that it can't be talking about another month. So, what about verse 14? Well, I'm confident that this is the translation and understanding we should arrive at. This is the burnt offering of the months of the year. Because verse 11 tells me I'm talking about Abib. So this is the offering of the month, which is of the months. It's over all of them of the year. This translation does not require me to alter the clear definition of Exodus chapter 12 of what Rosh Hodesh is. We would commit a horrible violation of a clear, precise definition of Rosh Hodesh if we get to Numbers 28 and decide we want that to refer to all new moons. That would be a violation of what Torah told us in Exodus 12. It cannot mean new moon because there's no Torah instruction anywhere giving you instruction on, or commanding you to celebrate a new moon, or giving you instruction on how to celebrate a new moon. The only way to get to this passage, Numbers 28:14, the only way to get to this passage, or any of them, and arrive at the conclusion that we're to celebrate every new moon, you have to change the definition of Rosh Hodesh. Have to. Now, before we leave this question about verse 14, it was also pointed out to me that when you look in Numbers 28:14 and in Numbers 28:11, that the word for Hodesh is in the plural. It doesn't say Hodesh, it says Hodeshes. Month, it says months. And to that I said, yes, exactly, correct, hallelujah, I'm glad it does. In Exodus 12, it's in the singular. This month shall be Rosh Hodesh. Of course it's in the singular. But now you get to Numbers 10 and you get to Numbers 28, and it's given us instruction on how to mark, celebrate, and bring offerings for every Rosh Hodesh we're going to encounter throughout our life. That's plural. You'll sound the trumpet over your Rosh Hodeshes. You'll bring these offerings in your Rosh Hodeshes. Of course it's in the plural. The plural doesn't mean it's referring to every month now. It just means it's referring to all the Rosh Hodeshes you'll ever encounter, observe, and celebrate. Plural cannot mean all of the months. Now let's move on and look at the text I promised you that we would be looking at. We're going to start with Jonathan and David, because those who celebrate the new moon, that's usually where they start. They start with 1 Samuel chapter 20, verse 5. Let me catch my breath, Matthew, and read that for me.
David said unto Jonathan, Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king at meat, but let me go, that I may hide myself in the field unto the third day at even.
Keep going.
Then Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new moon, and you shall be missed, because your feet will be empty, and when you have stayed 3 days, then you shall go down quickly and come to the place where you did hide yourself, when the business was in hand, and shall remain by the stone Ezel.
All right. David said, tomorrow is the new moon, and Jonathan said, tomorrow is the new moon. So see, evidently Saul required a new moon celebration, and according to the information there we're given, it lasted at least 3 days. Saul required a new moon celebration, and it lasted for 3 days. If you just opened up to 1 Samuel and started reading, and you got to that text, that passage, it would be easy to conclude, celebrate every new moon. It would be a simple thing to do. However, if you read Torah before you read it, and if you looked up the word translated new moon, you would easily conclude, no, something different's going on here. There is no new moon celebration being talked about in 1 Samuel 20. And I say you would easily conclude that. Why would you easily conclude that? Well, let's talk about the reasons just real quick. We're going to summarize them. When you look at the text, you take that text, 1 Samuel 20, and you start breaking it down, and you look up the Hebrew words, you'll find the Hebrew word Kadash, which means new, is nowhere in the text. The Hebrew word Yariach, which means moon, is not in the text. There is no Torah command for a new moon celebration. So if you come and look in 1 Samuel 20 and you say, well, they're celebrating a new moon, I'm going to go see what Torah tells me about that. You'll find no Torah command or instruction on how to celebrate a new moon. And fourth, there is only 1 month that is set apart from all other months according to Exodus 12, verse 2. And it's Abib. And we're told that Abib is Rosh and Rishon. What does Rosh mean? Head. What does Rishon mean? First. There you go. Good. It's the head month and it's the first month. And if you go back and look in Deuteronomy 16, it tells us that we're to observe the month of Abib. And observe is the Hebrew word shamar. And shamar means you guard it. You put a hedge of thorns around it. You protect it. You put a shield up to observe the month of Abib. So with that information, there's no need to change the Hebrew word Hodesh into some new definition. We can approach 1 Samuel 20 with the knowledge of Torah and conclude this, that in all likelihood, what we read in 1 Samuel 20 is a reference to the month of Abib. Why would I say that? Again, because Deuteronomy 16:1 says, observe the month. Doesn't it? Remember? Deuteronomy 16:1 says, observe the month of Abib. Not the first day of the month of Abib, but observe the month of Abib. All right? That means that any celebration or observance of Abib could last for more than one day. How long did Jonathan and David talk about this thing going on that Saul had before he might be noticed not there? 3 days. The only new moon, even if there was, let's say, a new moon day, there's nowhere that you'll find anything saying it's a 3-day celebration. It's a day, new moon day, right? But the month of Abib has many days. And so it would be far more likely that we're talking about the month of Abib, which could be celebrated for 3 days. Also notice that David and Jonathan knew exactly when that month would start. They didn't wait to sight a sliver of a moon. They said tomorrow is. Right? And then all we have to do is read the context of 1 Samuel 20. And I would encourage you to do that. When David had to flee from Saul on that 3rd day, we're told he did several things. I don't know if I put those on. I didn't put those on slides. I wish I had. But we're told that David had to do several things. In 1 Samuel chapter 21, he flees from Saul and he goes to Nob to the priest Abimelech. He ate the sacred showbread and he said to Abimelech, man, I don't have a weapon. I need a weapon. And Abimelech said, man, the only thing I got here is that sword of Goliath that you took. David said, that'll work. And so he took that. So he ate the showbread. He got the sword of Goliath and he left. 1 Samuel 21 also says, when he left Nob, he went to Gath. And he was concerned that the king of Gath would do him harm, and so he pretended to be a madman. Remember that? He let spittle and slobber run all over his beard so that the king of Gath thought he was a crazy man and just left him alone. 1 Samuel 22, he went and hid in the cave of Adullam. And then that's a beautiful passage. Read 1 Samuel 22. It says that those who were in debt, in distress, and discontented came to him in the cave. Isn't that beautiful? In debt, in distress, and discontented, they came to David looking for hope. And he's a man running for his life, hiding in a cave. Wow. Let me just leave it at that. 1 Samuel 22, he left the cave and went to Moab. And does anybody know or remember why he went to Moab? He knew Saul was a crazy man, so he had gone and got his parents, and he carried them to the king of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please watch over them until I know what YAHWEH is going to do for me. Receiving a word from a prophet in Moab, he left Moab and went into the land of Judah to a place called Achish. Then, while he's in Achish, he hears that the Philistines are raiding and robbing the threshing floors of Keilah. He goes there and fights against the Philistines, and he rescues the people of Keilah, and he saves their threshing floors. That's in 1 Samuel 23. So what is significant about that? We go from chapter 20 to chapter 23. It's a timeline of David running from Saul for his life from the time that chapter 20 starts. What is significant about what we were just told? In chapter 23, where does David go to save people? Or what is he saving? What's the problem? What are the Philistines doing? They are robbing the threshing floors. Let that sink in. They're robbing the threshing floors. What ripens in the month of Abib? Barley. So put all that information together and here's what we have. David and Jonathan announce in chapter 20 that Abib is beginning. If Abib is beginning, the barley is ripening. It will take 2 to 4 weeks for that barley to completely ripen. And once it's completely ripe, it'll take 4 to 6 weeks to harvest it, bundle it, and get it threshed. All right? To get it winnowed. All right? So in 1 Samuel 23, we read that David was at a threshing floor. That's solid evidence that he is not observing some random new moon. It had to be the month of Abib. He's moved from the month of Abib until when the barley has been harvested and it's at a threshing floor. It's solid evidence that they were keeping Abib in 1 Samuel chapter 20. Anybody got a question about that? Let's move to the next one. The next place that people will take you is 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 18. Go ahead, Brian, read that for me. 18 and 20 there.
The child was grown and fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, My head, my head. And he said to a lad, Carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him and brought him to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon and then died.
Wow. Anybody want to take a guess at what he said to his father there? My head, my head. You know what he said in Hebrew? My rosh. My rosh. Rosh means head. Okay? The dad said, carry him to his mother. Does that sound callous? It isn't callous if you understand the passage. Let's finish reading that, Brian.
She went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door upon him and went out. And she called unto her husband and said, Send me, I pray you, one of the young men and one of the asses, that I may run into the man of Elohim and come again. And he said, Wherefore will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, It shall be well.
It shall be well. It's neither new moon. So they say, see, there it is. They were celebrating at that time a new moon observance, a new moon day of some kind. And if you just opened up to 2 Kings chapter 4 and you started reading there, you would easily conclude that there must be a new moon celebration. But if you read Torah before you read 2 Kings 4, and if you looked up the word translated new moon, you would easily conclude there is no new moon celebration. Why would I say that you could easily conclude it? It's the same reasons over and over and over. The word for new is not in the text. The word for moon is not in the text. There's no Torah command anywhere to celebrate the new moon, and there's only one month that is set apart from all other months that is meant to be celebrated according to Deuteronomy 16, according to Exodus 12:2. Abib is Rosh and Abib is Rishon. So with that information, there is no need to change the word Hodesh to a new definition when you read 2 Kings chapter 4. We can approach 2 Kings chapter 4 with a knowledge of Torah, and we conclude that in 2 Kings 4 we must be at another Abib. Look at everything in that passage. Look at everything that the text is telling you, and it will tell you they were in the month of Abib. Why was the son out with the dad? What was the dad doing? He was reaping. He was harvesting. And keep this in mind, because this is it's a huge clue. They did not have multi-million-dollar combines like we have today. Like today, they'll go into a 100-acre field in 2 days, run through that thing with them combines and blow it into a great big old huge trailer, and they'll haul that thing to the mill. They didn't have that luxury back then. When they had a field that was ready to harvest, they harvested it by hand, and it would take 4 to 6 weeks to harvest it. And when a harvest comes in, even a little garden like I grow, when it's time to harvest it, you can't say, well, I'll get to it next Thursday. It won't be there next Thursday. It'll either rot or the deer will eat it for you, right? So when it's time to harvest it, you have to go get it, and you have to get it then. Doesn't matter how you feel, doesn't matter what else is going on, you have to go get it. So the dad is not being calloused at all. He can't put it off. He's doing what he has to do to take care of his family. He didn't know how serious the situation was with his son. He just knew his son said his head was hurting. So don't think bad of the dad. And the wife, the Shunammite woman, knew that he had enough on his plate already. Right? She's not wanting to further burden him. She knows he's doing what he has to do. Right? So she decided to deal with this very serious matter while he was dealing with another very serious matter. I know that in the past that I have read that story and thought, well, man, that's kind of callous to him. He should have taken care of the boy. Until I realized he didn't have a choice but to do what he was doing. And the wife clearly understood it. And if she understood it, we ought not get angry at it. Back to our text. All of the information we need to understand the time of the year that it is given to us in the text. We don't have to force a definition of Hodesh that doesn't belong. The wife shouts out to her husband, send me a young man and a donkey. I got to go to the man of Elohim. The husband shouts back, Abib's over and it's not the Sabbath. Hodesh is over. How do we know Hodesh is over? Because 4 to 6 weeks into it, he's harvesting. Abib started, it's ripening. 4 to 6 weeks after it's ripening, he's harvesting it. And he knows what all was involved in the month of Abib. And he says, so I know Abib's over, and I know it's not the Sabbath, so why are you going to see the man of Elohim? It's twisting the word Hodesh to come up with any understanding of this passage other than they just finished with the month of Abib. Let's look at some others and we'll move a little bit more quickly. Let's go to Psalm 81. Blow up the trumpet in the new moon and the time appointed and on our solemn feast day. For this was a statute for Israel and a law of the Elohim of Jacob. This he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he went out through the land of Egypt, where I heard a language that I understood not. So see, again, there it is. They're celebrating the new moon. If you just opened up Psalm 81, started reading, you'd easily conclude they must be celebrating the new moon. But this is one of the ones that I have the most difficulty with comprehending how those who celebrate the new moon would dare to use it. If you just opened up to Psalm 81, you'd get confused. But if you read Torah, and we're going to go back to Psalm 81, if you read Torah before you read this, and if you looked up the word translated new moon, you would easily conclude there is no new moon celebration. How would you easily conclude that? There are all the reasons again. Every time you come back to those reasons that this can't be about a new moon celebration. All right? So with that information, there's no need to change the word Hodesh to some new definition. We approach Psalm 81 with the knowledge we get from reading Torah, and we conclude this has to be a reference to Abib. And then once you start breaking down every word in that passage, you find out it's definitely talking about the month of Abib. What other evidence is there in that passage that this is a reference to Abib? Well, let's look at the words in the verse. First of all, let's start. We know what Hodesh means. Blow up the trumpet in Hodesh, it says. Translated the new moon, but it says blow up the trumpet in Hodesh. So I'm not going to belabor that one. We know what Hodesh means. But the next phrase is in the time appointed. Time appointed, look it up. It is the Hebrew word keseh. And it says keseh means fullness. Properly, it means fullness or the full moon. It comes from the Hebrew word kasah. The root word is kasah, and kasah means plump. That's a good definition or description of a full moon, right? So keseh means fullness or the full moon. So it says, blow up the trumpet in Hodesh in the full moon. And then it says, on our solemn day, on our solemn feast day, right? Well, let's look up the word that got translated solemn feast day. That word is the word Chag. Chag. Chag is a festival or a victim, therefore. A feast day. Used 62 times in the scripture. Do a word search of the word Chag. Use eSword, Strong, something. Do a Blue Letter Bible. Do a word search of the word Chag, and you will discover that there are only 3 Chags identified in Scripture. There are 7 Moedim. 3 of those 7 are called Chags. All Chags, all 3 of them, are a Moedim. But not all Moedim are a Chag. Only 3 of the 7 are identified as Chags. Anybody know what 3 they are? Very good. There it is. Why don't you just read that for us since you gave the answer?
3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before Yahweh your Elohim, in the place which he shall choose, in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles. And they shall not appear before Yahweh empty.
There they are. 3 Chags. Unleavened bread, Shavuot or Pentecost, Sukkot or Tabernacles. So, of those 3, Psalm 81 can only be referring to 2 of them. There's only 2 that Psalm 83 can be referring to. Why do I say it has to be one of those 2 and not the one in the middle? There you go. Very good. Because those 2 began in a full moon. Unleavened bread begins the 15th day of the first month. Sukkot begins the 15th day of the 7th month. And Psalm 81 told us they happened during a full moon. All right. So when you examine Psalm 81, it is clear that there was not a new moon celebration. The trumpet is being blown at the full moon that takes place during unleavened bread. Why do I say unleavened bread instead of Sukkot? Well, because Psalm 81 gives us 3 very distinct markers of when this trumpet's going to be blown. It's not only going to be blown at a full moon, it's not only going to be blown at a Chag, but it's going to be blown at the Hodesh. And of all the Hodeshes in a year, there's only one that is the Hodesh. So Psalm 81 is undeniably a reference to the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and it's not to any new moon celebration. Now, before we leave this passage, notice that verse 4 says that it is, I want you to notice before we leave that verse 4 says that this is a law of the Elohim of Jacob. Go back and search Torah. There is no law or command to celebrate a new moon, but there is a law and a command to observe Abib. Okay? I can stop there. I know I've gone a long time. I can stop there or I can keep going. I got just a few more. Y'all okay? All right. Let's look at another. Well, help me. Somebody read Isaiah 66:23.
it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith Yahweh.
There you go. Not only are we to celebrate new moons, but we'll be celebrating new moons in the millennial reign. Clear as day. If you just opened up to Isaiah 66 and you start reading right there, you're going to easily come to the conclusion you're to celebrate a new moon. But if you read Torah before you get there, and if you look at the word translated new moon, you would easily conclude there is no new moon celebration. And why would you easily conclude that? The same 4 reasons. Okay? It's more likely a reference to just month. I'm not even going to say Abib here, but just month. The simple translation of Isaiah 66 to me is this. From month to month and Sabbath to Sabbath in the millennial reign, we're going to worship Yahweh. Because that's what it says. From Hodesh to Hodesh is what it says in the Hebrew. From Hodesh to Hodesh. The word for new is not there. The word for moon is not there. It doesn't say from one Kadash Yariach to another Kadash Yariach. It says from Hodesh to Hodesh. So that's from month to month. And Sabbath to Sabbath shall all flesh come to worship before me. All right? There's no need to twist or change the definition of Hodesh to come up with some new doctrine. Let that verse just say what it says. All right, let's go to Amos 5 because this is, Amos 8. This is another big one that they use. Somebody read Amos 8, 4 through 6 here for me.
Hear this, O ye that swallow up the needy, even to make the poor of the land to fail, saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell corn, and the Sabbath, that we may set forth wheat, making the ephah small and the shekel great, and falsifying the balances by deceit, that we may buy the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of shoes, yea, and sell the refuse of the wheat.
So there you go, see it? They couldn't wait for the new moon to be over. Couldn't wait for it to be gone because the new moon was a special day that prevented them from buying and selling. So they're wanting it to be gone. If you opened up to Amos chapter 8 and you started reading right there, you would easily conclude there must be some kind of new moon celebration that I need to know about. But if you read Torah before you read Amos 8, folks, it's that simple. Yeah. You would easily conclude this is not a new moon celebration. Why would you easily conclude that? Well, did I not put those 4 reasons back up there? I didn't. I guess I got to thinking that y'all are masters now at knowing what those 4 reasons are. The word Hadash, which means new, is not there. The word Yariach, which means moon, is not there. There's no Torah command. So it's simple to conclude that Amos 8 is not talking about a new moon. What are some other clues we have that it might be a reference to Abib in Amos chapter 8? What were they wanting to do? And they wanted the Hodesh to be gone so they could do what? So they could sell their grain and gather their wheat, it says. But if you look that word wheat up, it's a reference to any kind of grain at all. So they want to sell grain and they want to set forth wheat. And that phrase set forth there means to plow it or to loosen it or to gather it. Okay? So think about what we're being told in Amos 8. They've gone all winter without new grain. They've gone all winter without fresh grain. They're having to eat out of the reserves. In the month of Abib, barley is beginning to come in. And even then, they can't eat of it until Abib 16, when they bring the first fruits and give those to Yahweh. After that, they can start eating it themselves. But it's still not, the fields aren't completely ripe. It might take another week or two for them to become completely ripe. but they want that month to get over so that they can harvest what's coming for their personal consumption, and so they can sell it, so they can sell corn. Amos is condemning men who aren't concerned with all of the holy things connected to Abib. Absolutely, barley's coming in, but there's so much more taking place in Abib than barley coming in. You've got Passover. You've got unleavened bread. You've got first fruits. Those things should have been a bigger concern to these men than making money using unjust weights. That's what Amos is condemning. During Abib, the barley harvest is beginning to come in, but look at all of the other things that were taking place. Now, look at it though, and you can see why a man who's only thinking about how much money he can make, why Abib would bother him. Passover prevents him from doing it. Unleavened bread prevents him from doing it, and there's 2 Sabbaths associated with that. First fruits is going to prevent him from doing it because he's got to bring a sheaf to offer up to Yahweh. And then there's 4 weekly Sabbaths mixed in with that. That's a lot of time they can't buy and sell. No wonder if you're simply driven by mammon, no wonder you can't wait for the month of Abib to be over. There's a lot of sacred time interfering with their carnal desire to make money. When you look at Amos 8, the safest, clearest, most accurate interpretation of this passage is to conclude that it's a reference to Abib. I've got, Benton has a translation of the Greek Old Testament of the Septuagint, and here's how it reads. They were saying, when will the month pass away? That's what it says in the Septuagint. When will the month pass away? Not new moon, but the month. Keep this in your thinking as well. If Amos is saying people could not buy or sell grain on a new moon day, he's referencing some new law that can't be found in Torah. And that's a no-no to add to what's written in Torah. If Amos is saying you can't buy, or referencing, he wasn't saying it was so, but he's referencing that these men were saying we can't buy or sell on a new moon day. There's nowhere in Torah you'll find that. So that would make the passage suspect to begin with. So you see from the scriptures we have already examined that we're looking at these passages, that when we're looking at these passages that have the words new moon, all we have to do to properly understand them is go back to Exodus 12:2 and use Exodus 12:2 to understand Numbers 10 and Numbers 28. And when you do that, then all these other passages become very clear. And since they're all going to be that way, I'm only going to go over 2 more. We're not going to go over all 20, but I do want to look at 2 more. The next one I want to look at is Ezekiel 46:1. Well, verse 1 and verse 6. Somebody read that for me.
Thus saith Adonai Yahweh, the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east shall be shut the 6 working days, but on the Sabbath it shall be opened. And in the day of the new moon it shall be opened. And in the day of the new moon it shall be young. It shall be a young bullock without blemish, and 6 lambs and a ram. They shall be without blemish.
In the first part of Ezekiel 46, it's talking about the gate being opened. And in verses 6 and following, it talks about the offerings that are to be brought concerning this Hodesh. So there you go. See, the gate is open on the new moon and the Sabbath. So new moon and Sabbath both are special days. Which means, as they claim, there are 3 kinds of days. There's working days, Sabbath days, and new moon days. And to that I would say that if you opened up to Ezekiel and just started reading, when you got to this translation of this passage, you would think, well, there must be some kind of new moon celebration. But if you read Torah before you read Ezekiel 46, And if you looked at the word translated new moon, you would easily conclude, oh no, that this is not talking about a new moon celebration. Why would I say that? I got it this time. Because of these same 4 reasons. All right? Do I need to read those again, or are y'all getting those in your heart? Okay. I think Ezekiel 46 is more clear than any of the other passages that we looked at that it's not talking about the new moon. I think it's more clear than any of the others, especially when you get down to verse 6, where it starts talking about the sacrifices and the offerings being called for. This is clearly connected to Numbers 28. Numbers 28 starts listing the sacrifices for Rosh Hodesh. Ezekiel 46 is listing those same sacrifices. Now, I will note this for you, that Ezekiel 46 uses all of the same sacrifices, but Ezekiel's numbers don't match the same numbers in Numbers 28. But Ezekiel also lists other Moedim. And he'll list the sacrifices, but the numbers aren't exactly the same as you'll find in the book of Leviticus or Numbers. For that reason, do you know that there was a great debate on whether Ezekiel should even be included in the canon? It almost got rejected for that reason. And then some rabbi determined it needs to be included because Ezekiel's probably talking about the minimum sacrifices, not the whole realm of the sacrifices. But the point is, Ezekiel 46 is a reiteration of Numbers 28. They can't be separated. Numbers 28 talks about sacrifices for Rosh Hodesh. Ezekiel 46 is talking about those same sacrifices. So it has to be talking about Rosh Hodesh. And Rosh Hodesh has one definition, and it always refers to 1 month. It never refers to any month other than the month of Abib. So this is simple. I want you to get this in your heart, write it down, take a screenshot of it, do something. You can't separate Ezekiel 46 from Numbers 28. And you can't separate Numbers 28 from Exodus 12. You can't do that and arrive at a proper interpretation of Ezekiel 46. Ezekiel 46 has to be interpreted in light of Numbers 28, which is about Rosh Hodesh. And Numbers 28 must be interpreted in light of Exodus 12, which clearly defines Rosh Hodesh for us. If you're going to properly interpret Ezekiel 46, you've got to go this route to do it. Does that make sense? Let's look at one more before we close. Just one more of the 20, and this one is found, well, this is really number 21. 20 in the Tanakh, there's one in what we call the New Testament, and it's in Colossians 2. Read that for me.
Let no man therefore judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect of an holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Sabbath days.
There it is. The new moon's listed with Sabbaths and Moedim and dietary laws, so there must be a new moon celebration. And if you just started reading in Colossians, and you came to this verse, you would conclude there must be a new moon celebration. However, if you read Torah before you read Colossians, I don't know who said it first. The first one I ever heard say it was Rob Skiba, but he said we shouldn't read what Paul wrote until we read what Paul read. So you shouldn't read Colossians 2 until you've read Torah. Amen. Right? Why would you easily conclude that this is not about a new moon celebration? This is going to be a little different, but it's pretty much the same. The Greek word neos, which means new, is not in the passage in reference to the moon. The Greek word selene, which means moon, is not there. There is no Torah command for a new moon celebration, and then number 4 is the same. There's only one month that's set apart from all other months, according to Exodus 12:2. So we know all of that. The Greek word that got translated as new moon is the word pneumania. Pneumania. And when you look it up, it says in Strong's, well, that's the festival of the new moon. But notice he said that it is a compound of 2 other Greek words that have a prefix and they have a suffix. So, Mr. Strong's, we're going to go check you out. You say it means the festival of a new moon, but let's see what that word actually means. The prefix is the word neos, which is the Greek word for new. The suffix is the word main, spelled M-E-N, but pronounced main. That's the Greek word for month. See that? Pneumania actually means new month. There's a difference between a new moon and a new month. Just as there's a difference between saying head of the months and saying head month. So no matter how we wrestle with this passage, and many do, the fact remains, if there was a new moon celebration, it would have said new moon. There's no reference in the Gospels, there's no reference in Acts, there's no reference in any of the writings of the apostles of anybody ever celebrating a new moon day. Anywhere. Colossians 2 is not a reference to that either. Clearly, it doesn't say new moon. That would have been a combination of the prefix neos and the suffix selene, selenee, which means moon. But instead it says pneumania, which means new month. So this is Colossians 2:16 is a reference to Abib. Consider this. Those Gentiles who had converted were now doing 4 things. And it was upsetting their family, and it was upsetting their friends. What 4 new things did they start doing when they turned and said, I'm going to follow this one named Yeshua? Well, Paul told us in Colossians 2 what they'd done. They stopped eating and drinking unclean food. People don't understand that. I told you I was in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania all this week. And when we eat, it's still always an issue. With my co-workers that I've been working with for 7 or 8 years. Anytime we sit down to eat, it's like, well, Steve, you can't eat this, can you? It baffles their mind. One of them even said we were sitting down to eat, and he looked at the menu and he said, hey, Steve, they don't serve pork here. That's good. I said, that is good. He said, but they've got shrimp you could eat, and lobster you could eat, and scallops you could eat. I said, no, I can't eat those either. You can't eat those either? No, sir, I won't eat those. Well, why? I said, because we're told not to. Is that in the Bible? That's what he said. Is that in the Bible? I said, yeah. Leviticus chapter 11. Well, where's that at? Now, he goes to church and been going to church for a few years. He had just told me that a few months ago. And I asked him again. He said, yeah, I'm still going. But he said, well, where's that in the Bible? I said, man, that's the 3rd book in your Bible. It is. Yeah. Later, I copied and pasted Leviticus 11, put it in the new Good News Bible translation, and texted it to him. A day or so later, he came back to me and said, I read that thing you sent me. I said, good. He said, you're not supposed to eat it, but you're not supposed to even touch some of that stuff. I said, there you go. He said, I didn't know that. Now, we went out to a Japanese hibachi one night to eat. Volvo took us out there. Sitting around the hibachi, you got this big old griddle. You know how they do, cooking. And I ordered me a filet. So they pulled my filet out. You know how they do? They cut it up into all little pieces, and they set mine way over on the griddle, apart from what they were cooking for everybody else. Yay, this is good. So he scooped me up my big old plate of rice, and when my ribeye got ready, he scooped it up and held my plate out, and he filled my plate up with that filet. I sat down, took a bite, and said, oh man, this is good. Some of the best ribeye, filet I've ever had. And I'm eating my rice, and the two co-workers, one sitting here, one sitting here, they had shrimp and scallops, right? So they scooped the chef scoops theirs up and puts it on their plate. He's got 2 extra shrimp. Without asking, he leaned over and boom, boom, popped them on my plate and said, there, you got an appetizer. 2 co-workers. Well, there's 3 of them. There were 3 co-workers sitting there. Without me saying a word, when that happened, all 3 of them said, no! I thought, well, they're learning. And they said, well, Steve, you got it off. You'll be okay, because as soon as it hit, I popped them back off. And they said, you'll be all right. And I said, no, I won't. And I scraped about half my plate back off into another place. And that's when that guy said, that's right, it says you can't touch it. I said, yeah, anything it touches, I'm not touching it either. But I said all that to say, when you start eating according to Leviticus 11, friends and family don't understand it if they're not following Torah, right? And so here you have the Colossians. They're also doing exactly what you've done. They forsook pagan festivals and began to embrace the holy festivals of Yahweh. That's upsetting, friends and family. They started keeping and worshiping on the Sabbath day. Friends and family didn't understand that. And it's so easy to see this. They quit celebrating the Roman New Year that took place on January the 1st in honor of Janus. And they start celebrating a new year that began in the spring, around the spring equinox, called the month of Abib. In order to make Colossians 2 about a new moon, the only way you can do it is to ignore what is clearly written in Torah and to create a festival that Torah does not command. So I'm going to conclude now. Peter gave this warning. He said, account that the long suffering of our Elohim is salvation, even as our beloved brother Paul also, according to the wisdom given unto him, has written unto you, as also in all of his epistles, speaking of them of these things, in which are some things hard to be understood, which they that are unlearned and unstable rest, W-R-E-S-T, they rest, as they do also the other scriptures unto their own destruction. Go home and look this word rest up. It says here, it's the Greek word strebloo. It means to wrench. To wrench something means to twist it suddenly and violently. So I would think that's where we got our word for wrench. I don't know that for a fact, but that sounds right. You put a wrench on something and you twist it suddenly and violently. So rest means to wrench something. That is to actually put it on a rack and torture it. What do you do with a rack? You know what we're talking about with a rack? You tie somebody's hands and their feet and you just start stretching, pulling things out of joint, right? It comes from strebloo, from strepho, That's the root word, strepho. Strepho means to twist, to turn around, or to reverse something. Okay? Peter's using some very graphic language to describe how some people interpret Scripture. Particularly, he's talking about the writings of Paul. But notice that he isn't warning just about Paul's writings. He said that there are those who will put Paul's writings on a torture rack and twist them to say things that Paul never meant for them to say. But Peter says those who will take Paul's writings and do that also take other scriptures and do the same thing. Peter's warning us about people who put verses in torture racks and stretch those verses to say what they need them to say. They wrench it. They give it sudden and violent twist. So beware when you see simple, plain, clear language in Scripture being wrenched. So to that point, let me add this. I know what Strong's says about Hodesh. I know Strong's claims it can mean new moon. And Strong's even says it only applies, it only implies month. But what he says there can't be factual because the word's used 276 times. 256 times it gets translated as month. Hodesh gets translated 256 out of 276 times as month. That's more than an implication. To make Hodesh anything besides month, you have to wrench it. I know that you can look and you can find historical data of the new moon being celebrated. But when I study the new moon, every time I look into this subject, I have to come back to some simple truths, and let me go through those with you quickly. Simple truths. The Hebrew word for new is not in one single text where we find the words new moon. The Hebrew word for moon is not in one single text. Of all 20 of them, not one time will you find the Hebrew word YAHWEH. This is another interesting thing here. There are several passages where the first day of the month is mentioned. In Hebrew, it would say, Echad Yam Kodesh. Echad Yam Hodesh. In none of those passages do we find the phrase new moon or read anything about a new moon celebration. None. Even though all of those passages talk about Echad Yam Hodesh, first day of the month, there's nothing said about a new moon celebration. And if you're curious about where those are, there they are. You can go back later and screenshot that if you want to, but I wanted you to see how many of them they are that reference the first day of the month. But let me continue with the simple truths. Next simple truth is Exodus 12:2 clearly defines the month of Abib in two ways. It is the Rosh Hodesh, the head month, and it is the Rishon Hodesh, the first month of the year. The next simple truth is Numbers 10:10 speaks of blowing a trumpet on Rosh Hodesh. There should be no confusion about what is meant by Rosh Hodesh if you read Exodus 12:2. Numbers 28:11 through 14 speaks of sacrifices and offerings on Rosh Hodesh. There should be no confusion about what is meant by Rosh Hodesh. Deuteronomy 16:1 makes it clear that Abib is a set-apart month to be celebrated, guarded, shielded, and protected. It's different than every other month. Those are simple truths that we should not wrench, twist, turn suddenly, turn violently to make them mean something that they do not mean. Listen, I'm not accusing new moon observers or lunar Sabbath keepers of being deceitful in any way or being deceptive in any way. I am convinced of those that I have met and those that I know that most of the people who celebrate the new moon and the lunar Sabbath simply have a great desire to love and serve Yahweh. But I am also convinced that most of them saw the 21 references to the new moon, and their overwhelming desire to be obedient caused them to embrace this practice without a proper understanding of what Torah actually said. I am also convinced that when you begin from the wrong place, from the wrong starting point, you'll always end up in the wrong place with the wrong doctrine. I used this illustration 6 years ago when I taught on this subject, and I close. This is my third closing. I close with that illustration again. There it is. India, read that for me, please. Well, read that page. It's like German or something, doesn't it? I typed that up. Anybody remember what it is?
Oh, yeah.
I bet you could. Anybody remember what that actually is? That's actually 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I typed 1 Corinthians 13 out on my keyboard, and all of my moves were absolutely perfect. I did everything right. Everything right except for one thing. Instead of beginning with my index fingers on F and J, I shifted them to the right one key and started on G and K. But I read the text perfectly off of my computer, and I typed, my fingers moved perfectly where they were supposed to move, but that's what I came out with. Everything I did correctly and in the prescribed way. The only problem was I began in the wrong place. When you study the new moon, if you do not start in Exodus 12:2, and if you don't connect Exodus 12:2 to Numbers 10 and Numbers 28, you can be correct in everything else you do and still wind up with a false doctrine. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. As His name is put upon you, so shall He Himself bless